Focus bracketing is a technique where we can expand the focus from the nearest to the furthest subjects in our frame. This is usually done by taking a sequence of images where we're progressively moving the focus from the front to the back of the subject, and then we merge these separate exposures in post-production editing software. Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor and I'm a Sony Imaging Ambassador, and I wanted to take a look at the subject of focus bracketing. Right at the end of 2022, Sony introduced focus bracketing as an option on their latest A7R5 camera, and I suspect this is a feature that will be on every new camera released in 2023 and beyond. So the question is why do we need focus bracketing? Now if we take a look at this image, we can see we have sharpness right from the immediate foreground right to the distance in the center of the image. And so if we're wanting that sharpness, sometimes we may need to do focus bracketing, so we get that foreground to background sharpness. Now this particular image, however, was captured with a single exposure. It didn't use focus bracketing. It was captured with a 15mm focal length at an aperture of f11. Now if we focus carefully, we can get the focus right from the immediate foreground right through to infinity, or the distance, all in one shot. To give you further examples of this, this is also a single exposure using a 20mm prime, the FE 20mm f1.8G, also at f11. We take a look at this image. Now we're moving a little bit longer in the focal length. This one was captured with a 25mm Batis, but also at f11. And we're still getting that immediate foreground sharpness right through to the ship in the distance, all in a single exposure. Now let's take a look at this one final example here, where we've got this image. Again, we appear to have foreground to background sharpness in this particular image. This time it's captured with the 1224 G Master, and you'll be surprised to see that I didn't actually stop down. I shot this wide open at f2.8. So to understand when we need to focus bracket, we really need to have a good sense of depth of field, and also how to focus to maximize that depth of field, or depth of sharp focus from the foreground to background. You can sometimes avoid the need to do focus bracketing by simply dialing in the hyperfocal distance for the lens and the aperture you're using. Now this is not always possible, but if you can achieve foreground to background focus in one single shot, then obviously you will avoid an unnecessarily longer workflow by taking multiple shots where the focus is put at different distances to the camera. So I thought I would use this depth of field calculator in the advanced mode. This is from the Cambridge in Colour website, where we're looking at the hyperfocal distance. You can only see the hyperfocal distance if you do click on the advanced options if you're visiting this website. Here I'm using the 20mm Sony Prime at an aperture of f11. Now I'm setting the focus distance to 3 meters, and that is the hyperfocal distance for this lens at f11 with that 20mm focal length. And what you can see there is everything from 1.49 meters from the lens is going to be acceptably sharp, and that's just under 5 feet from the camera. Now in most instances that is enough for most photographers shooting landscapes with this focal length. Let's take a look at some more options. For instance, if I need to bring the nearest acceptable sharpness forward to 4 feet, all I need to do is stop down to f16 on this particular lens. Now the hyperfocal distance is now 2 meters. Now I will go into manual focus mode and dial in, basically just turn the focus ring until I get that 2m for 2 meters distance on that lens, and then I'll have everything from 4 feet to infinity, or the horizon line, acceptably sharp. Now, as we use wider angle lenses, we can see that we can get foreground subject matter even sharper by just keeping that f11 aperture. To give you an example here, I'm setting the hyperfocal distance to 2 meters, and everything at 0.98 meters, or just over 3 feet, will be acceptably sharp. Now, some landscape photographers try to avoid using f22 and f16. They like to always photograph at f11 and f8 for maximum sharpness. But having said that, most photographers will be more than happy with the corner sharpness and overall sharpness at f16 on a full frame camera, and get a good foreground to background sharpness doing that. And so what we're looking at here is I've set my 1635 zoom lens to the widest angle of view. That's the 16mm focal length. Now everything from 0.4 meters to infinity will be acceptably sharp. Now that is a distance of just 16 inches from the camera. So I could imagine, you could imagine me kneeling down onto this sand dune, and everything immediately in front of me is going to be sharp, right up to the distant mountains in the background of this particular scene. I would certainly include f16 in your workflow. Don't get into the habit of saying, oh, most photographers say not to use f16 because of diffraction. Just try f16 and just see whether that is sharp enough for you as a photographer. Now, if we know the rules of hyperfocal distance, and you're able to determine the best hyperfocal distance for the lens you're using, you can see that when you're using ultra wide angle lenses such as this 12-24 G Master, we can see that we have a really good depth of field, even wide open. So this is that 12-24 G Master at the maximum aperture, and we can see everything from 2.95, 3 meters. It's basically 9 or 10 feet away from the camera, is going to be acceptably sharp, even wide open. And of course that depth of field just increases really quickly as soon as we start stopping down at this 12mm focal length. So I first wanted to talk about focus bracketing with the launch of the Alpha 7R5 camera at the end of 2022, and that's because it included the focus bracketing feature in the menus. Now notice it's focus bracketing, not stacking. Stacking is a process where we merge the sharp focus in post-production. At the moment, Sony's focus bracketing feature will take a sequence of images where the focus is moved progressively further away from the camera, but it won't merge that sharp focus in camera. So you are going to need to do that in post-production editing software, which is something that I will cover in a short amount of time. Okay, so when I was demonstrating this for my camera review, I decided, as you've already seen this shot at f11 with a single image, I decided to take a sequence of images with a much wider aperture. So this again was with my 20mm lens, but this time using the lens at f4 instead of f11. Now when I did the sequence of images, it was able to achieve sharp focus from the nearest stump just in front of the camera right through to infinity or the horizon line in just 4 images at this focal length at f4. What we did then is we then aligned and merged those sharp focus exposures in Photoshop. You can use alternative software to Photoshop as well. So this was called stacking images in the auto blend layers feature. If you think the tripod was moved slightly, you might want to auto align and then auto blend the images. Now the sequence of images started with me just focusing on the nearest thing in front of the camera, which was that leading stump. The camera then moved the focus to the second stump, then to the third or fourth stump, and then all of the way towards that horizon line to get 4 separate exposures that I then merged in Photoshop. So why focus bracket when we already realize we can perhaps get most of what we want to do in a single exposure if we understand about depth of field and hyperfocal distance? Of course, this is, we were talking predominantly about the wide angle lenses where hyperfocal distance can often achieve what we need with a single exposure. The problem comes when we're using longer focal length lenses and when we're working very close to our subject matter, such as close-up photography and macro photography. So if you take a look at this scene, for instance, where we're taking this sunflower head, you might be looking at this going, well, I've stopped down to f11 and I'm still not getting enough depth of field. I want more of that flower head sharp. So this is where we might consider doing some focus bracketing. Take a look at this other example. This is at a 54mm focal length at f11, and you can see the tops of those mushrooms there. The rear of those mushroom heads are not in sharp focus. So even at f11, the depth of field is insufficient with a single exposure. So we could possibly want to stop down to f16, or we could try maybe focus bracketing, taking multiple shots where the focus is moved further back in the subsequent images. So let's take a look at this feature as implemented in the Alpha 7R5 camera, and as I said, it will probably appear on all new releases in 2023 and beyond. So we access this feature by pressing the left side of the control wheel to get to the drive mode settings. On subsequent updates to an Alpha 1 or an A9 camera, this would be on the top left hand dial, and then you'll need to dive into the menus. But on all other Alpha cameras, the drive mode is on the access via the left side of that control wheel. We'll then need to cycle down until we get to the focus bracket feature. Now we'll need to come over to set up the couple of the options there. So you can do this by moving the multi-selector over to the right, pressing the right side of the control wheel, or just touching the menu item itself. And the first one is called step width. Now we can go from 1 to 10. I think number 4 is the standard or default setting. The step width is basically how much the camera will move further away from the initial focus point to take a sequence of images. Now obviously if we set it to 1 narrow, you're going to have to take a lot more images in order to get to the back of the subject matter to render full depth of field. So if we set it to 10 wide, the camera will take fewer images in order to get from the near ground subject to the background of the subject. Number of shots. Now 10 will probably be a very conservative amount. If you're very close to your near foreground subject matter, you are possibly going to want to increase that to 20, 30 or 40 shots. Now this if you shoot more shots, obviously that's going to take far longer to merge that sharp focus in your post-production software, especially if you're using a camera such as the Alpha 7R5 with its 60 megapixels. So once we've set those two parameters, and I'll come back to those parameters, both the step width and the number of shots shortly, because a lot of you were saying, well, what settings should I use for those? It's not clear cut. Most of the time you are going to be doing a trial sequence, making some adjustments and then shooting it a second time. But before we go there, you probably want to go into the menus by pressing the menu button. Going into the drive mode, that's page 5 on the Alpha 7R5, that may move slightly on subsequent models, and looking for the bracket settings. Once we've gone into the bracket settings, you'll go into the focus bracket settings. Here we have a number of options that you may want to look at. I would leave the focus bracket order as it is, from basically the nearest to the furthest subject matter apart. Then go to exposure smoothing. Now I've elected to switch this on. If we get some slight variation in lighting conditions, I'd like the camera to adjust the exposure slightly so that we're getting consistent exposure across the sequence of images. Shooting interval, I can't really see a reason not to have this set to shortest. And now it's not going to be blazingly fast, especially if we're in low ambient light and the shutter speeds are quite long. It will take a little while to get through the sequence. It would be nice at some future release if we're doing focus bracketing on, say, an Alpha 1 at 30 frames per second and we have very bright illumination, whether that could happen at 30 frames per second, but that's not the case at this current moment in time. The sequence will take a little bit longer to play out. Then, of course, we have focus bracket saving destination. Now, I've chosen to create a new folder. Sometimes it might be difficult to work out what is the first image and the last image in the sequence if we don't put a sequence into a new folder. So this is something that I've chosen to do. So all the 20, 30 or 40 shots of that sequence will all be in an individual folder. Now let's talk a little bit about focus mode. When you choose to go into focus bracketing, you might be in continuous autofocus. Now what the focus bracketing feature will do is it will automatically move you out of continuous autofocus into single shot AF. Now the focus bracketing feature will also work in manual focus. You don't need to set it to autofocus for the focus bracketing sequence to be effective. Now another thing I want to talk about as we're going to create a sequence of images where the focus has changed in between each shots is the subject of called focus breathing. Now to make things easier on your post-production software, it would be beneficial if your lens didn't have problems with focus breathing. Now we do have focus breathing compensation on the latest model Alpha cameras. I'll show you this little video of focus breathing. This is focus breathing where the subject gets larger or smaller in the frame as we shift focus. Now that poses a few problems for post-production software merging sharp focus. You'll notice on this particular camera we have breathing compensation and that basically keeps the relative size of the subjects the same, making it easier perhaps to stitch or merge sharp focus. Only problem there, of course, is the breathing compensation is contingent on the lens you're using. It has to really be a Sony model lens, but it's also only available when you go into movie mode. So again, I would like Sony in future firmware upgrades to be able to have breathing compensation on for stills mode as well, so then the focus bracketing feature could access consistent size as we shift focus in this focus bracketing sequence. So it is a bit sad at the moment that it is a movies only feature, but as I said, it would be great to see this in future firmware updates. So my recommendations at this current moment in time is to choose a lens that you are going to do focus bracketing with, which has minimal focus breathing. Now you'll find in some reviews, such as by Gerald Undone, he'll often comment on whether the lens has minimal focus breathing or significant focus breathing, and you're really looking for the Sony's lenses that have minimal focus breathing, and they are around. There are quite a few wide angle lenses that do have minimal focus breathing, and so the one that I'm currently using and will be using into the future for any focus bracketing is the 2070G. Now the great thing about the FE 20 to 70 f4G lens is it also has a very close focusing distance. As you can see me getting up close and personal to these feathers and leaves on this tabletop here, and it's got an excellent magnification ratio of 0.39. This is perhaps Sony's best magnification ratio for a non-macro lens. So this is certainly a lens that I would recommend for focus bracketing. And you can see the closest focusing distance of the 85mm is really nowhere near what the 2070 is capable of, getting us that 0.39 magnification. So let's go through a typical focus bracketing workflow, and I'll be demonstrating this on the Alpha 7R5 camera, and we're going to be working at close distance with this particular lens. The test chart that I'm using to demonstrate this is a Spider lens cal, as you can see on that little illustration on the right side of this slide there. So the starting focus point is a little over 1 foot from the lens, and as I go through that sequence you'll see I'm taking 20 shots with the step width set to standard. I am stopped down to f11, so let's see how far back along the chart we get to just by taking 20 shots with the default settings, if you like. And you can see that with 20 shots we're getting just 2 inches further back in sharp focus, so not nearly enough shots, or maybe we need to adjust the step width and increase the shots as well. So what I'm going to do in subsequent brackets with this particular target is I'm going to increase the step width to number 10, which is the highest or wide setting, and I'm also going to increase the number of shots. Now I've increased it to 40 shots, and as I move closer to the minimum focusing distance of this particular lens, as you can see here, hopefully that will be enough to get this target in sharp focus. So let's give this one a go. This is my second run through. So start focus point is right at the bottom of the frame again, and now we're going through the sequence of 40 images. Now I'm going to stop this a little bit early because as I'm taking pictures I noticed just at the 21st shot in that sequence we've got the focus extending pretty much all of the way back with that wide step width setting there. So this is really where you want to decrease the number of shots. You'll stop your aperture down a little bit more and you'll increase the step width, and so you can really control how many shots in the sequence that you want to work with. A little bit of experience with the post-production software as well will lead you to work out whether you have enough images for this bracketing sequence or not. So again, in my Alpha 7R5 review, I tried this out not on a test target now, but this skeleton of this bird that I found, and I found that I could get the foreground to background sharp focus in 17 shots at f11, and that's a reasonable amount of shots. Now I merged the sharp focus again in Photoshop. I auto aligned the layers and auto blended the layers. Now I auto aligned the layers because I actually was using a 50mm macro in this particular demonstration, which does have focus breathing. So that auto align layers will actually try and get a sort of a standard subject size as it's trying to merge the sharp focus. Now this is not dedicated focus stacking software, so you might find something such as Helicon Focus which will do a better job out there if you're prepared to spend a little bit more money. So that's Helicon Soft, and I know a lot of macro photographers favor this particular software when using, and of course there will be other software out there as well, and I've just put a little link down there, and I'll probably put that in the information below the video as well. Okay, so if you found this information useful and you're looking for ongoing support, just remember I have a support channel for Alpha users where we have Q&A forums, we have ebooks, we have patron-only seminars. I also make available cam set files for late model Alpha cameras. This is where you can set up all of your camera from a file put onto a memory card, exactly the same way as the 500 or 600 page ebook that you can also download from that Patreon support channel. And I've covered pretty much all late model cameras except for perhaps the A7S III and the FX3. I've covered all late model cameras since the A7 III and A7R III, so I've probably got you covered there. Okay, so hopefully you found this video useful. Just give me the thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and head over to the Patreon support channel where I'll supply a link again in the information below the video. Okay, cheers. I'm Mark Gaylor, Sony Imaging Ambassador.